Hello and welcome to PodRocket. I'm Brendan. I'm on the engineering team here at LogRocket, and joining me today is Brandon Baer, CEO and co-founder of Flightcontrol. Brandon joined us way back at the beginning of 2021 to talk about Blitz.js, and now he's back, fresh from Y Combinator's winter batch, to tell us about his new startup. Brandon, welcome. It's great to have you. Thanks for coming back for round 2 with PodRocket.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
So really exciting times for you. A lot of things going on that we could talk about, from product design to fundraising. But let's just start by talking a little bit about Flightcontrol. What is it? What problems are you solving? And why should I want this product in my life?
Sure. So Flightcontrol makes it easy for developers to deploy scalable, secure applications without any DevOps. And so if you've probably heard about Heroku, things like that. So essentially we provide a Heroku-like developer experience, but directly on your own AWS account. And so the big problem we solve is the scalability and limitations of things like Heroku, and just the limitations around configuration and stuff, that a lot of these platforms like Heroku are just too simple and restrict you too much.
Yeah, and so I'm really curious about how you sort of came to this idea. Like, how did you get to, feeling like there was enough of a niche or enough of a need from developers to be able to thread that needle between maybe the sort of simplicity of a platform like Heroku and the full-on flexibility, but also the complexity of just managing your own AWS resources? Like, was that something you found through your own work, through working with other developers? Where did that all come from?
So I had experienced the problem myself personally, but the real kind of motivator was, since I previously created Blitz.js, I noticed that a lot of Blitz users had the same problems. And, I come from this background, like there's this spectrum in development, right? All across development, there's a spectrum between making something like really easy to use, but like highly abstracted, versus low level abstraction, full power and control, but most of the time that's difficult to use. And I started out on this journey like on the side of, I just wanted to be really easy to use, and I didn't want to think about CPU and memory and all this stuff. I just want to click a button and just have my app deployed. But I I ran into like the problems of that approach. It's like, no matter how much you want to just ignore things like CPU and memory for your app, like you have to know about it. Like, unless you have a tiny side project where like nothing's actually happening. But as soon as you get like, real users, like you just can't get away from that stuff. Even if it's serverless functions or whatever, like there's just a fundamental limit or to what you can abstract, and you have to understand a little bit of that. And so it's like, okay, this approach of making things too simple is not great. And so we need to try to find a balance between making it simple and easy to use, but also letting you have full power and control.
I feel like as you were answering that question, and mentioning Blitz.js, I was thinking, oh yeah, this sounds like a framework developer sort of talking about a problem. Yes. and the simplicity versus customizability. I guess it seems like you've spent now quite a bit of your career building tools and frameworks for other developers to use. Is that something you sort of set out to do intentionally, or what's kind of drawn you to that work?
No. It was a surprise to me. So like I've always been an entrepreneur, always like building things, working, side businesses and stuff. Always wanted to like run my own company full time, my own software company. Mm-hmm. And I was doing consulting for a while because I didn't really have like a great idea. But then I had this problem like with JavaScript, where I just wanted to, I missed the Ruby on Rails type of developer experience in JavaScript. And so that's what led to me starting Blitz.js. And that just has, took off. Like I really tapped into a bunch of pent-up demand for that. And it was through that I realized that, oh, wow, like not only do I really like building developer tools, I have a really good knack for it. And so it's like, well, all right, I guess this is my niche from now on.
What I'm interested in sort of like having a knack for developer tooling? Like what are the things you feel like that you do or that you're interested in that like make that kind of work a good fit for like your personality or your skills?
Great question. I think one thing is I just have a very low tolerance for unnecessary complexity, for uh, inefficiency, for just stuff. Like if there's something that like I shouldn't have to do, like I don't want to do it, you know. And then I think the other, so there's like that I really tuned into the pain and the frustration of like, and I have all these ideas like it doesn't have to be this hard, it doesn't have to be this difficult, it can be so much better. So I have that motivation side, but then also it seems I'm really good at simplifying complex things. Um, and this is like really hard to do, but a lot of times the solutions just kind of like they just flow out of me. Like it's not like a huge amount of effort for me to come up with a simple solution.
Mm-hmm. Um, Circling back to flight control, who do you feel like are the users that you want to find for this platform initially? Like, who are the people who are going to get value from this tool? Is it freelancers? Is it sort of web shops? Is it small startups? Like, who do you see as the people who are best positioned to take advantage of what you're building?
All of the above. And to
Great answer,
add some
everyone.
more color there is if you are using Heroku or Render or Railway, then yes, we're absolutely we believe a better fit for you for now and in the future as you scale your company, but especially as you scale, right? Um, but yeah, really anyone that's running a web app or deploying a static site, we can handle all of those. You don't have to know anything about AWS in order to use flight control. So it's super easy to use. But since you bring your own AWS account, then you have the ability to pop the hood and leverage the raw power of AWS should you need to. Maybe you end up hiring a DevOps person sometime to do more advanced stuff around security scaling, but you have the option, which is something you do not have with the other platforms.
Mm-hmm. I'm as somebody who's done a little bit of DevOps stuff in the past, my sort of initial reaction of it is, oh God, what happens when somebody goes and like rescales one of the machines or turns it off and turns it on again? How do you sort of manage the complexity of users accessing resources through flight control, but also having access to the platform themselves and being able to sort of go in and press buttons and change the state of the resources they're using?
So the core powerhouse behind our system is temporal. It's a technology that came out of Uber for managing complex backend workflows, and it's sort of like it brings the simplicity, like how async await simplified promises and callbacks and all that type of stuff. So temporal does the same type of thing to backend workflows. So instead of manually managing queues and scheduled jobs, temporal kind of lets you just write your code like normal synchronous code, but it's actually async running on multiple machines over multiple days, like whatever you need. And it's just super, like it's crazy the amount of complexity that it like there. Okay, let me put it this way: there's so many things in our backend processes that I'm just like, it seems like it'd be so likely to have bugs, right? Because of like conflicts and state getting mismatched and stuff. But temporal just like makes it work. Like there's no bugs. It's crazy.
That's really cool. Was that a technology that you had worked with previously? Did you find that as part of your sort of journey into building this product?
It was not something we used previously, but I knew about it, and so I'm like, okay, we should probably use this because we're going to need some help here. And yeah, so it was an open source technology out of Uber, and now Temporo is like the company around it. Um, it's yeah, I would highly recommend it, but it is heavyweight, so it's like a tank. It's like driving a tank. It's there's a learning curve. It's heavy. It's not like especially nimble. But the power and the robustness you get from it is like unparalleled.
I guess another thing I'm curious about is the platform as a service, PaaS landscape in general. You mentioned Heroku, one of the OG players Amazon, within AWS, there's like 3 or 4 different PaaS products. I feel like the question I always ask when I see a new startup in this space is like, why does the world need another platform, and what sort of makes flight control unique beyond simply sort of being more customizable or more flexible than maybe another offering?
So Heroku was created, I think it's 15 years ago, which is like wild to think about. And they like really, as far as I know, either innovated, like invented this thing where you fully abstract AWS, and it's just a very simple service to use for deploying applications. And that wasn't like the case, and so they just made it deploying things so much more accessible to so many people. But like over the the last 5-10 years, developer experience has become so much more important, and so there's pressure on these platforms to make an actual better developer experience. But also applications and things have gotten a lot more complex, and so you need to do more things. Um, and then there's also the scaling part. Like there's so many companies like Instacart, for example, that started on Heroku, but they reach a point of scale at which Heroku breaks, and so they have to migrate out to AWS. And it's like this just happens over and over and over. And so it's like, wait a minute, why does this keep happening? Like nobody has solved this. Like everybody tries to create the next Heroku, right? Like there's been so many companies trying to be the next Heroku, but no one has achieved it yet. And the big thing is because most of them try to fully abstract AWS. And so you still have that fundamental scaling limitation because Heroku has a custom layer of infrastructure between you and AWS. And so there's an extra lossy layer there. But with flight control, it's just pure AWS. And so we solve that. But not only would we solve the scaling thing, it's also really easy to use, which is very difficult to do. So we have people telling us that like we are 10 times easier to use than like one of our closest competitors. We have people saying like, yeah, we don't have to know anything about AWS, but as you use flight control, you start to learn more about AWS, and so that like they like that because we don't we surface some of the underlying stuff, right? And so yeah, it's like the like another thing is people end up needing to use like some service from AWS, whether it's for hosting files, or like maybe they want to use DynamoDB or like something eventually. And so then they have an app deployed somewhere else and then some other thing on AWS. And so like when they look at flight control, they're like, wow, I can get the same exact developer experience that I have on this other platform, but directly on AWS, and then everything is all together. And I can use my free AWS credits, like total no-brainer.
Mm-hmm. As I'm sort of thinking about what else has happened in the past 15 years, it also seems like with the rise of sort of DevOps as a concept, there's a lot more engineers who are primarily focused on writing code and building applications, but who are at least a little bit comfortable with infrastructure and a little bit comfortable sort of deploying code, rolling back. And so it seems like there may be sort of a whole group of engineers, who just didn't exist 15 years ago, who want to take advantage of something like flight control where it doesn't get in their way, but you can be a little bit closer to the underlying toolkit and the underlying platform.
Yep, for sure. And one thing that we do really well at is we have an infrastructure as code feature that is designed for normal app developers, not for DevOps. So like there's things like Terraform and Pulumi that's infrastructure as code designed for DevOps. So you have to know like AWS and DevOps it's very hard to use, right? But our infrastructure as code is a simple JSON file that allows you to define your services, so you can have like multiple environments and then multiple services within each environment. So like a database, a web server, a static site. Eventually, we'll be adding like Redis and background processing. And so it's really easy to just use and configure those for any normal app developer. And it's just, you can do so many powerful things around like service dependencies and be like, hey, I need my server to deploy before my Next.js front end actually builds, because the Next.js build has get static props, and so it needs to fetch the data at build time. So we solve things like that too.
Yeah, and is that based on any existing sort of infrastructure as code tool or technology, or are you guys
No,
building that from
from
scratch?
scratch. Yeah.
Interesting. And was that something you decided to do because you sort of felt like just none of the existing technologies were sort of the right abstraction or like speaking the right language for developers?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. There's nothing that is like at this level of abstraction, um, and like it's relatively like it's just configuration, right? In a file, so it's not like we're like making some new programming language or whatever. It's just JSON config. Um, yeah,
Yeah, and you avoid all of the problems that you have with something like Terraform of managing state files, and there's a bunch
yes,
of complexity where it's powerful, but then you have to learn all this specific domain knowledge to use it safely and effectively.
right.
Um, I thought we might also talk a little bit about some of your sort of startup journey and experience at Y Combinator, since you guys, I think, just within the last couple of weeks came out of the winter batch. I guess maybe a good place to start. I'm curious, how you ended up at YC and what that experience is like in 2022. I know it's kind of very different now that there's the pandemic, and I think it largely happens remotely. So, what's that experience like?
So we decided to apply to YC last fall. We were like trying to raise a funding round, but it wasn't going very well, and we're like, well, okay, let's just apply to YC, see what happens. Um, didn't expect much, but then I met a YC alumni that was really excited about what we were doing, and they went in and like recommended us, flagged us as like somebody that YC should talk to, interview us. Um, and so then we, on Monday morning, it's been like last fall, we got an email inviting us to interview on Wednesday. And we were like, oh, wow, like we're actually interviewing. Like, this is amazing. Because I had applied twice previously with other ideas, like in the past years. Um, so it's like you kind of just expect to apply and like not hear anything back. uh, but so we interviewed and we got in, and we were super excited. And yeah, so the actual batch was January to March this year, and it is just so much more than I even expected. Like I just have so much respect for what YC has built. Like the advice that you get, the one-on-one mentorship with your partners, and the custom tailored advice for your company, all of the batch events, listening to these battle stories from other successful founders from like Stripe and Airbnb, um, and then just how they totally flip the cat and mouse game on its head with investors. So now that you're in YC, suddenly investors are chasing after you. And then they have this, demo day at the end where it's like, all right, like everybody is fundraising at the end, and everybody's talking to all these investors. And so you have so much leverage as a founder because the only thing investors are scared about is other investors. And so when they know you're talking to a bunch of other investors, like you can just like do fundraising so quickly, and they're like, because like a typical fundraising process will drag out for like a month or two. But with YC, it can happen in just a few weeks.
I guess I'm curious. Also, I know like YC is very deliberately a short, like 3 month, incredibly intensive period where you're sort of growing and meeting investors and working on your product. I guess one, how do you just stay sane during that sort of intense period? And two, how did you and your co-founder decide who was going to sort of do what and sort of focus on what parts of the product, the fundraising, the growth story?
So second question first. We're both doing everything, essentially. But I guess overall, like I'm the CEO. I'm better at the product design, marketing, in sales, and my co-founder Mina is the one that's building out all the AWS stuff. Like he's the DevOps guy. Like I AWS, still terrifies me a bit. I think it terrifies my co-founder too, but
Healthy
yeah,
healthy mix of respect and fear.
yes, yes. Um, and so for the most part, he's just like building out the back end stuff. He's also helping doing onboarding and support calls. But yeah, we're basically just, it's like, um, you just do what you have to do. You just stay focused, and build. As for how do we stay sane, it's like something I learned early on with Blitz is I kind of was forced to learn how to manage my own psychology, and it like it's really tough. Like in the early days of Blitz, Blitz is growing, but then a Redwood gets announced, and I'm like, oh no, like Redwood's just going to totally destroy us. And you have all these emotions about like competitors and market and like um, things, and you just have to like get really focused on your inner confidence about like what you're doing, where you're going. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. Like, um, there's just because there's a competitor like in the same space doing like similar to what you're doing. There's the market is huge, right? And like everybody doesn't want the same thing, And so now like we have a great relationship with Redwood. It's great because they have like GraphQL, and so it's like if you want GraphQL, then use Redwood. If you don't, then Blitz. And so it's like everybody gets what they want, right? um, so yeah, it's just we had to stay like, and we still do as a startup, very intentional on a daily and weekly basis around how are my stress levels doing. Like if I'm stressed, stress comes from whenever you want something to be different than it actually is. And so to resolve the stress, it's just a mind thing. All you have to do is just accept the current reality as it is, like to truly accept it. Like, yeah, like this is not the end state I want to be in, but I accept that today is how it is. I'm not growing as fast as I want, or I'm not being able to ship as much features as I want to ship, but it's okay. I just have to accept it, and it will change, and do what you can to make it change, but you have to accept that reality. So it's like this duality is a super big thing in my life. It's like two different things that seem to be opposites, but you have to accept them both at the same time.
Do you feel like that's kind of a consistent theme from other startups you talked to and worked with? Like, is that just kind of the experience of being a founder? Do you feel like it's like very different from person to person?
The stressors and stuff are very common.
Mm.
I think most people do not manage the stress of a startup very well. A lot of people end up burning out. A lot of people um, kind of go too hard on it. Yeah. And just like don't manage the stress. So I think it's super important to really get a good grasp on your own stress. Like that's how you're going to win over the long term.
Yeah, I think something that honestly comes up nearly every time we talk to people sort of doing open source or in early stage companies is sort of managing burnout and managing your stress level and being able to sort of do something over the long term, not just for a few weeks at a time. Do you have any other sort of like thoughts or tips or things you would want to pass on to people who like might be, in that same boat a few months from now? And what you would recommend for how they sort of manage that stress and that experience?
I think it all comes down to self awareness. Like you have to be extremely self aware to know yourself, right? Because there's not like burnout comes in so many different ways to different people. It's not like the same thing, right? And so you just have to be super self aware about how are you doing? Like, are you getting burned out? Like, how are your energy levels? Um, and like for myself, it's whenever I start not being excited about working, it's like this is a drag. It's like, okay, I need to let off the gas a little bit. I need to go do something else totally not work related. Um, but overall, like I strive really hard to have a full day off work every week. Like that's almost a non-negotiable for me, unless it's, sometimes I need to put in a couple hours on that day for if there's some big deadline that or something. But for the most part, I have a whole day off work. I make sure to do working out like 4 to 6 times a week. I do rock climbing. I'm a pilot, so I fly, and so I have these things that I really love to do outside of work, and so I make sure that I keep those in my life, even though So and then overall, my philosophy is work hard, play hard.
Another thing I think is maybe interesting as a fellow podcaster, you have been sort of documenting and chronicling your time at YC in your own podcast. I'm curious what's the sort of story behind that? Was that something you sort of always had planned to do? Was that something you kind of did at the spur of the moment? Like, how did you end up doing a YC podcast?
So I like started in the bootstrapping world, and there's quite a few podcasts in that world from founders and co-founders. A couple top ones are Art of Product and Build Your SaaS. And so I always found those super helpful and very inspiring, and I just love listening to them. And so I always wanted to have my own podcast like that, but I never had a co-founder until Flight Control. And so then it's like at the beginning we're like, yeah, and he also have listened to these other podcasts as well. And so we're like, yeah, let's just do it. And it's been super helpful. Like we don't have that many listeners, but it's great for us just to talk about it. It's great to have it documented. And now if we go back like 6 months and listen to ourselves, it's so funny because you're like, it's you totally forget like what your mind was at. And so
Mm.
it's great to listen.
Yeah, I'm curious how much you feel like the podcast is sort of for other people, and how much you feel like it's for yourself, whether that's just to sort of produce an artifact of like where your head was, when you were recording it, or I guess to just kind of like have a forum to work through like all of the things you're thinking about with your co-founder. Like, do
I
you
think
feel
it's
like
a
it's
pretty
it's
mix of all of them. Yeah. Like there's
yeah,
not necessarily one that stands out.
cool? And then I guess my other sort of question about that is, do you intend to sort of carry this podcast forward? Is this going to be sort of a part of your journey with Flight Control, you know, from now on, or are you kind of planning to give it a pause and see what happens?
Currently, we have no plans to stop it or pause it. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see how long it goes.
Yeah, I'm curious. Is this something that you've heard? Like, have any of your users found you through the podcast, or has it been sort of like a marketing channel for you?
I don't think anyone has found us through the podcast yet. I think more people find us and then find the podcast. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, like we don't have enough listeners and downloads yet to be a marketing channel, but for sure, like it could grow into that.
And I guess last YC question: if you had to pick like one highlight, one low light, what are your takeaways from your time doing the YC batch?
I would say the highlight is just getting in, just getting accepted to YC was just such a like amazing feeling. Only 2% of the startups who apply get in, and yeah, so that was just a really great feeling. As far as low light, I can't really think of any like thing. Like it's like I would say one regret would be not networking enough before the batch started with my other batchmates. Um, and like the networking with them is a bit tough right now. It's all fully remote. I think it sounds like starting with the next batch, there's going to be some more in-person components. Like it'll still be mostly remote. Um, but yeah, so there's a lot of my batchmates. There's only a few of them that I've actually got to know, right? And so after the batch, like we'll continue to build relationships with them. But yeah, I wish I would have done that a bit more.
Another thing maybe to check in on with you is Blitz.js. I know there's still some stuff going on there. I'm curious, if you want to give us an update on what's happened since the last time we've talked about it, and what's coming up next.
Sure. So I think last time we talked, it was probably before we actually made the fork of Next.js. And so our original, like how we had built it, we had a custom compiler that compiled your Blitz code into a Next.js code base. And we reached the limits of that, and we decided to fork Next.js and move the logics directly into Next.js. That ended up killing our momentum, and we just kind of stagnated our growth last year. We just got bogged down like keeping up to date with Next.js and various headaches around the fork and stuff. Um, and yeah, it's just like was not working. And so in December, we decided to pivot Blitz from an all-in-one framework to be a framework agnostic toolkit that you can add on to Next.js, any Next.js app, or any JavaScript application. But we're starting with for Next.js, like highly tailoring that experience. And so the end result is that you will still get the same developer experience as you had before, but you will be interfacing with Next.js directly. And you just have the Blitz, like the Blitz authentication, the Blitz Zero API layer added on top, but still like the same developer experience. So we are almost ready to ship the first version of that. It should be initial version should be shipped by April 18th. That's because I will be giving a talk on it at React Miami. And so we have to have something ready. But it's going good.
Great. Yeah. Great way to set a deadline for yourself and ensure you get something done. I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you got on that pivot from people in the Blitz community? Are people sort of excited for this? Are people apprehensive about it? Like, what are people?
Overall, people are very excited. One thing that was like kind of amazing to me was one person was really kind of pushing back. They were upset, like, oh no, like I'm going to have to learn Next.js and stuff. And I was like, no, like the developer experience is going to be like very much the same. Like, and like after explaining it more, they're like, oh, okay. Like, and I found out that they had Blitz was the first thing that they had ever used, like programming. They learned to code with Blitz. And so they didn't know what Next.js is or like how similar Blitz is to Next. So that was amazing to like learn, like have to know that people have learned to code using Blitz. But yeah, a lot of people are excited about it. There's a lot of people who like Blitz but have not used it yet. And with the Blitz toolkit, now they're like, okay, yeah, now I could actually use this because I don't have to buy all into a fork of Next.js.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And how are you sort of envisioning balancing flight control and Blitz.js going forward?
So currently, like Blitz is our kind of a distribution channel for flight control. Like a lot of our initial flight control customers are all because they know about Blitz. And so, we'll continue to invest in Blitz. And right now we have two maintainers. Flight Control is paying for 2 maintainers to work on Blitz. They're both, some of them are helping on Flight Control as well. But yeah, we're continuing to make Blitz really great, and we want to succeed over the long term. I think there could be a chance that we would spin it out into like a separate into the JavaScript foundation or something like that in the future. But yeah, we're long term committed to making it successful and seeing it become all that it can be.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear. Excited to see the sort of next evolution of Blitz. Really excited to hear about flight control. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today. Is there anything you would like to point our listeners to?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Flybear. You can link to my podcast. It's called Flight Review, flightreview.fm, and flightcontrol.dev is there. And I'd love to have you try out Flight Control. If you have any issues, let me know. And I'm more than happy to manually onboard you to Flight Control as well. If you're already deploying somewhere and you want some help, migrating your production application over, let me know. We'll be more than happy to help.
Thanks so much. We'll see you online.
Thank you.